Pastor Pace. Oh, today, yesterday, this week, many things happened this week, especially Thursday. Thursday was quite an amazing day. I want to start to frame today's message talking about the divine principle and the map of heaven. I want to go directly to the Divine Principle book. This is the very last section of the part of the Principle book called the Period of Preparation for the Second Advent of the Messiah. It's talking about the Third World War. Since we know that because God gave the first human ancestors the blessing to rule the universe, when Satan works through fallen people to create an unprincipled imitation of the world where this blessing is fulfilled, God has to allow it. On the heels of Satan, God conducts his providence to claim back Satan's world and its fruits. So, because of the fall, because the fall was initiated, even though the fall was initiated by the archangel, it was Adam and Eve, God's children, who allowed this fall to take place and basically agreed and united with the archangel. So because God respects our portion of responsibility and our position as children who are going to be co-creators, he had to allow this process to follow through in order to later be able to save fallen Adam and fallen Eve and the fallen archangel. So Satan always took the initiative all through history. He got his way. He always got his way. And then God always has to come afterwards and clean up the mess, basically. God is in this position where he's unable to convince the archangel and fallen mankind that these things won't work. Instead, he's had to let people find out for themselves. So this is saying that in the end time, eventually Satan will even be able to create a false world, a whole world of people who are thinking in his way instead of God's way. At the consummation of human history, Satan's side and God's side will strive until they each attain sovereignty over a world. This is why the democratic world and the communist world stand confronting each other. Consequently, it became inevitable that there would be world wars. First to divide and then to unify these two worlds. Inevitable. The moment that the fall took place, it was inevitable that there would be conflict and chaos and confusion and suffering and difficulty. It was inevitable. And inevitable that eventually this would come to a world level scale. And that's what happened in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 20th century. The First and Second World Wars had the providential purpose of dividing the globe into the communist world and the democratic world. Afterward, yet another war must take place to bring about their unification. This conflict is the Third World War. It is inevitable that the Third World War take place. However, there are two possible ways it may be fought. One way to bring Satan's side to surrender is through armed conflict. By force, by police, by the military, by some form of force, forcing the evil to stop, standing up against evil and using physical force to stop it. However, at the conclusion of the conflict, there should come an ideal world in which all humanity is to rejoice together. This can never be built merely by defeating enemies in battle. Afterward, they must be brought to submission internally that everyone may be reconciled and rejoice sincerely from the bottom of their hearts. To accomplish this, there must come a perfect ideology which can satisfy the desires of the original nature of all people. So God acknowledges, even if there has to be some kind of a confrontation, a war, a struggle, in the end, it won't be enough unless even the ones that are defeated, even the ones who are evil, eventually can change their hearts and agree, yes, this is better for all of us. Come to this unification of all people centered on this common base, this common understanding. The other way this war may be fought is as a wholly internal ideological conflict, without the outbreak of armed hostilities, to bring Satan's world to submission and unification in a short time. People are rational beings. Therefore, a perfect, unified world can be established only when people submit to one another and participate in unification through a profound reawakening. By which of these two ways will the Third World War actually be fought? It depends upon success or failure in carrying out the human portion of responsibility. Well, the Third World War was fought. It is finished. And God's side was victorious. And Satan's side agreed and let go. And that's why the Berlin Wall came down. That's why true parents could go to Russia. That's why we went to Russia for 10 years and taught the divine principle. The war was completed. And the communist side agreed. Reluctantly. But they agreed. Communism doesn't work. It's the wrong path. It's the wrong way. From where will the ideology essential to the resolution of this conflict and the establishment of the new world come? It surely cannot come out of the communist world rooted in the Cain-type view of life, since the Cain-type view of life opposes the internal aspirations of the original human nature. Rather, this ideology must arise out of the democratic world, which is rooted in the Abel-type view of life. Abel-type view of life means accepting spiritual reality, accepting religion, accepting that man is more than just a material being. That's the Abel view of life, generally speaking. And of course, the democratic worlds were worlds where Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, religions were allowed to flourish. And people were encouraged, even taught, that we are more than just material beings. Even though at our schools we study evolution, and there's that whole process of materialistic idea, but generally speaking, obviously, we have incredible freedom in these democratic countries to accept that there's more to life than just our physical existence. Nonetheless, it is a fact of history that no conventional ideology among those prevailing in the democratic world can effectively defeat communist ideology. Therefore, a hitherto unknown ideology will emerge from within the democratic world. And it did. And we taught it. It was called Causa. It was called, Father wrote books, and we went out and we studied and taught about the problems of Marxism, Leninism. And unification thought was born. And unification thought dissected, took apart everything that Karl Marx and Lenin and Stalin and all of these people were teaching, and explained clearly how it will not work. For the new ideology to be born, there must first arise a new expression of truth. So our critique of communism came from where? Came from the divine principle. Came from the new expression of truth that rose up in the 20th century. This new truth is the essence of the Abel-type view of life and the core of democracy, as has been the case in the past. When the new expression of truth appears, it may contradict the old expressions of truth in which many people have believed. Hence, even the democratic world will be divided into two camps, which, like Cain and Abel, will be pitted against each other. Even where this new truth comes, people will be divided. People will struggle with each other. And we look at our world today and we see it. There's division. There's materialism and spiritualism, and there's all kinds of division among people. When the new truth secures a victorious foundation in the democratic world and then conquers communist ideology, the unification of the world will be achieved based on the one truth. The one truth. Finally, there will be a teaching, an understanding that people will be able to unite around, that people will reasonably and logically and sincerely be able to eventually agree with and say, you know what? That makes sense. I think you're right. I think that will really work. Satan knew God's plan to unify the world through the one truth and presented a false imitation of the truth in order to unify humanity centered on himself. This false truth is dialectical materialism. Dialectical materialism denies the existence of any spiritual reality, setting up an explanation of the universe based on a wholly materialistic logic. In denying the existence of God, it also denies the existence of Satan. Thus, in promoting dialectical materialism, Satan was effectively denying his own reality, even risking his own demise. Interesting. There's a spiritual being, Satan, and yet this spiritual being was encouraging and trying to lead people to believe that the spiritual world does not exist, that the only thing that is real is material. There is no God. There is no Satan. There is no life after death. There is no spiritual world. Everything is based on material. And that's what the root of science had been in many cases in the 20th century. But there were those that realized that wasn't enough. Satan understood what would unfold at the close of human history and knew well that he would surely perish. Accepting that this was not the time to be worshipped, he rose in a monstrous denial of God, even at the sacrifice of himself. This is the spiritual root of dialectical materialism. As long as the democratic world lacks the truth which can overturn this evil doctrine, it will always be vulnerable and on the defensive. For this reason, someone on God's side must proclaim the perfect truth. Materialism. Dialectical materialism. Dialectical means that conflict and struggle is inevitable. Why? Because it is immaterial. The very way the world evolved and grew was through violence and struggle and conflict. Plus and minus, struggling with each other. An egg, you know, this little chicken inside this egg, fighting, struggling, trying to break out of its shell, and eventually, you know, coming out of its shell and growing. You know, the shell is evil, trying to destroy the chicken, the little chick, prevent it from being free. And so it has to break out. And so this was applied to social ideas. Eventually, the idea that there had to be struggle between the workers and the people who owned the means of production. And all of these things. And evolution. Evolution is just the struggle, just the haphazard experiences of things struggling to develop and have greater ability. This was dialectical materialism. So I was really confronted. Some things happened on Thursday. Thursday was quite a day, because Thursday was the day that we went to the funeral for Eula Massey. Who was at the funeral? some of us here went. On the way to the funeral, you know, I know her very well, and I felt this was going to be a good experience. You know, you think, oh, you're going to a funeral. Oh, good, we're going to a funeral, we're going to have a good experience. You know, who thinks that way? Well, we do. We really do. And actually, Eula, she really wanted people to think that way. She was able to, you know, she was very conscious and aware of what was going on the last couple of weeks of her life, and she actually told people what to do at her funeral. You know, she told Gail she wanted Gail to read a certain poem, and she told her grandchildren, you know, how she wanted them to, what she wanted them to do. And she even said, I want this to be like a birthday celebration. And it really was, actually. And even though there were a couple of her nephews were Baptist preachers, so they were really heavy into Jesus. But even though they were heavy into Jesus, I really felt a very beautiful and a very wonderful and a very uplifting spirit at this funeral. And I just felt, wow, this is so beautiful. You know, she lived a really full life, and her life was difficult. And at one point she was an alcoholic, and her husband was an alcoholic, and she wasn't, in some cases, she wasn't a good mother to Gail, to her children. There were things they went through, but as time went on, they learned the lessons of life, and things changed, and people loved each other. And in the end, she was able to go to the spiritual world on a foundation of being loved by her family and being loved by people. And of course, you know, Tim and Gail, as blessed central families, Gail took such good care of her mother in the last several years of her life, you know. And, you know, some of us here know about taking care of our elder parents, and, you know, even Chris worked at the home. I mean, this is a very important thing to do. Very important that we have the right attitude toward our families, even when they're becoming old and senile. So, I felt so peaceful at this service. On the way to the service, while we were driving, and we were just about to get on Poole Road, I got a text from Vince Savage. He said, oh, by the way, did you know that Evan Alexander, who wrote the book Proof of Heaven, is speaking tonight at Quail Ridge Bookstore in Raleigh? I thought, are you kidding me? He's speaking tonight. This man who is all about the spiritual world is speaking tonight, the same night that we're going to this funeral to say goodbye and to encourage Eula Massey to go into the spiritual world herself. And I knew when I got that text, I said, boy, today is going to be quite a day. And so we went and experienced this incredible, wonderful service. I want to tell you a little experience I had on the way there. Also, not only did I receive that text, but we stopped, just before we got there, we stopped at one of these country stores. And this particular country store is one of the country stores that not only do they sell gas, but they have a grocery inside. And when you go inside, the place is huge. And they even had a place where they were selling food and stuff like that. And there were these three old guys just sitting there. You know, that's where they hang out during the day. You know, there's nothing going on anymore in their life. And I remember, it's very interesting, I used to live with Tim and Gail in this area. When I first came back from Russia, I lived with Tim and Gail at a home off of Poole Road. So I've been into that store different times. One time I went into that store and I met one of my friends that I went to high school with. You know, I thought, gee, this store is a very interesting place. We stopped to get gas. We went into the bathroom, myself, Sharon, and Kiva, and we went into the bathroom, and as I was walking out, right there where these three men were sitting, I looked down, and there was a dime on the ground. Now, I've told stories to you because I go out selling. You know, I sell wood roses, and I'm always paying attention when I pick up things like pennies, you know, but very rarely do I find a dime. When I was in North Dakota, I never found a penny, but several times I found a dime. I thought, dime is interesting because it's 10. So I'm looking down right there, and I bend down and I pick it up and I turn to those guys and I said, look, if I find this here, I'm allowed to keep it, right? Because I felt almost funny, you know? It's like maybe I'm stealing because this dime belongs to the store. And they kind of laughed, yeah, you can keep that one. So I picked it up and I put it in my pocket. I thought, is this some kind of a sign? And I walked out to get into my car. And as I was about to walk in and get in the car, I looked down and there was another dime. A second dime was sitting outside the building on the way to right in front of my path. And I picked it up and I said, wow, 2 dimes at once. And so I got this inspiration. You should look at the dates of these 2 dimes. I looked at the date. One of them was 1972. And the other one was 2012. Exactly 40 years. Exactly the 40 years that True Parents were in America. 1972 and 2012. And I looked at the dates, and I thought, well, that's 40 years. Isn't that interesting? Just a very little thing. Then we went to the funeral. Then, after the funeral that evening, we went to the speech. And we met Eben Alexander. And I was very interested and curious about this person because, of course, you know, I'd already spoken to him. And I'm going to tell you very honestly, before Thursday, I was planning on showing you his talk at the Theosophic Society that he gave that's on YouTube. I was seriously considering showing his lecture for Sunday service. And that was before I heard anything about him coming to Raleigh. Then I went and we heard him speak, and Jack was there.
You did show one of his videos.
I have shown one of his videos, but I was very interested. I had just learned a week ago that he wrote a new book. And where did I learn about this new book? When I was flying back from North Dakota and I was in the airport. You know, in the bookstore at the airport, they have one place where there's the books that most people are reading. And they had his book, Map of Heaven, at the airport. So that's where I realized he had just written a new book. So I was curious, okay, he's written this new book. What's the difference, or what is this book about? Well, the book and his whole approach is not simply about his near-death experience. Okay, he had a profound, amazing experience with the spiritual world. But his core focus and attention isn't about him having that experience. It's about the significance of that experience in its relationship to how we should view the reality of this world. And especially because he himself is a surgeon. Okay, he went to, in his talk, he explained he went to UNC and Duke. He went to both schools. And he was, his father was a very famous surgeon at Wake Forest. And he spent 25 years as a surgeon, but he also was a teacher and a lecturer of, and so he explains very clearly that he feels he's very much on a mission, that God sent him back here, okay? That he came back for a purpose from this terrible disease. And one of the reasons why he is taken very seriously is because he speaks the language of science, the language of logic and reason, the language of medicine. People are going to consider him and respect him for that. And not only that, the disease that he had, the time that he was in this coma for 7 days, was a very unusual and extreme form of E. coli. And all of the evidence that modern science has concerning the effect of this particular disease, says that he should have died. And even if he was going to survive, he should not survive with any of his mental facilities intact. His brain was basically destroyed when he was in the coma in terms of the effects of the disease. So when in his story, he explains that when he first came out of his coma, he had no memory at all of who he was, of his family, of being a surgeon, nothing. The only thing he remembered when he first opened his eyes and was sitting in that hospital bed was what had just happened to him. He only remembered the near-death experience. And after several hours and several days, the rest of his memory started coming back to him. He started understanding language, being able to speak in English again. He started recognizing the people that were standing around his bed, his family. He started remembering that he was a surgeon. All of these things came back to him. And he said that based on medical understanding, none of those things should have been able to come back to him because the part of the brain that deals with memory was gone. So for these reasons, his testimony, his, words and his book, he did not write this book immediately. His son told him. His son's, the first time after several months, he started speaking about what happened to him. His son told him, before you study anything about near-death experiences, before you talk with anybody about this, you should write everything down first. So he wrote 20,000 words. He wrote everything down that he remembered about his experience before he spoke to anyone else, before he started researching about near-death experiences, before he started studying the modern-day science and quantum physics and all of these things. His experience was in 2008, okay? But we're just hearing about him now. He wrote Proof of Heaven, which focuses on his experience, but this book, Map of Heaven, is different. In this book, he collects many testimonies of many different people who have had near-death experiences. And he explains the history of religion and the history of science. And he's talking about the core problem. The core problem in the world is materialism. He doesn't call it dialectical materialism, because that part of materialism is past. The conflict, the struggle of communism. Why was communism so deadly and dangerous and evil? Why? If communism had taken over, if people had said, you know what, I think maybe it's a better idea, you and I could not be sitting here today. We would not be allowed by law to have meetings where we talked about spiritual reality. Instead, we would be considered sick people. All of the laws that would have come out in a society would have all promoted materialism and evolution and would have said that religion is the opiate of the people. It's a sickness. It's a disease. It's a fantasy. And once the authority of government and power, everything you learned at school, everything you would learn where you work, no one would be allowed to talk about the things we're sitting here talking about. There'd be no Eben Alexander. There'd be no Bart Ehrman. There'd be only, the gradual collection, confiscated, all of the Bible, Scripture, things would be confiscated. It would have really happened. It's hard to believe, but that is the belief behind materialism. But communism did not take over. So here we are, free. We're free birds. And here we are. And people like Eben Alexander, and he understands. He says the greatest problem in mankind right now is the problem of materialism. That what he discovered, the core teaching of what he discovered, is that consciousness our original self or our conscious being is not material. It doesn't come from material. Evolutionists and many scientists and many people, many of our own, family and friends, ultimately they believed that material is the core of reality. That everything that's going on in the brain is a result of all these electrons and protons and photons and electrical impulse and chemistry. And the bottom line is, because all of this is so incredibly complex, it creates an illusion of consciousness. But as soon as the brain dies, consciousness is gone. There's no afterlife. Everything is based on the material. This is what his books are about now. This is what he speaks about. So he speaks with confidence and authority. So I listened to him and I thought, he is really just like St. Paul. Think about it. He is the modern day St. Paul. So we, people like me, people like you, people don't listen to us. We can teach the divine principle to people, but hey, who are we? We're just Joe Nobody or Jolene Nobody. We don't have the authority. Like the disciples of Jesus. The disciples of Jesus were blessed beyond belief, that they had a personal relationship with Jesus. They knew Jesus so well because they lived with him. Jesus touched their lives so personally, but they had no authority in the world. They had no position. They had no real education. So even though they knew the heart of Jesus and they knew Jesus so well, who really promoted the teaching of Jesus to the world? It was the enemy of Christ, Saul of Tarsus, a Pharisee who didn't believe in Jesus at all, who after the death of Jesus, he had this incredible spiritual experience. He was knocked off his horse. Eben Alexander, an atheist, a neurosurgeon, who proclaims in his talk, he says, I was a card-carrying materialist. I believed everything that science taught about evolution and everything. I used to think that way. I know that way of thinking. He was knocked off his horse. 7 days he had this incredible spiritual experience. Changed 180 degrees. And now he's on this mission, going through the world, literally the world. His books are translated in, I told my daughter to get the book in France, in French. His books are now translated in all these languages. When I was in the airport in France, his book was there. Proof of Heaven. So the point is, what about how do we relate to people like this ourselves? We have to really welcome these people. We have to support them. We have to encourage them. And I've read half of this book. It's very inspiring, because it's just talking to our original mind. It's the divine principle in a different kind of language, slightly. Now, he was asked different questions. There's a couple of things that he points out that are very, very principled. One of them is, he said, based on his experience, he knows that the only reason we're here to learn lessons. We're here to grow. That the reason why we have a physical life is to grow and to learn and to become people of love. He really believes that. And he said that when we die, we will go through a judgment. He said the judgment will be the standard of your ability to love. He says if you've hurt people, if you've wronged people, then your own consciousness will tell on you, and you will have to face that result, that you lived a life where you were evil or nasty or mean. And your own consciousness will be in pain because of that. This is exactly what the divine principle teaches, that we have to, we will be judged based on the standard of love. There was a little boy in the audience, and he asked him the question, do you believe in the devil? Do you believe in evil? Is there a devil? This was a little boy asking this question. And he looked down at him and he said, oh, that is a very good question. It's a good question, don't you think? Because we believe in Satan. He said, let me explain it this way. He said, evil is really when the absence of true love. When, God gave us a certain amount of, well, he didn't say God. He said, he sometimes referred to God, and sometimes he avoids using the word God too much, because he knows that it's a word. In any case, help me remember this. He basically said that he didn't come across a personality, a specific being that is evil, that's running around, but he said evil is the result of not loving, of not being able to realize our potential as a person, that we are meant to learn lessons, that we are meant, once we experience this incredible love, this amazing standard of love, that we should grow and we should embody that. He said, so evil is more the absence of the ideal of God and goodness. So he did not encounter, in his experiences, he did not encounter, a personal, enemy of Satan. Also, he very rarely, I don't think he even mentioned Jesus once, except to, when he talks about in his book, he explains many things about the teachers, and he accepts that Jesus Christ was profoundly connected to God and was truly, had this relationship with God, but based on his personal experience, he can't acknowledge that Jesus has any special, he doesn't know this level of the principle of the history of restoration through them. He doesn't understand this whole process. But in his book, he's really talking about unity between the culture. And he says there are two fundamental problems. One of them is materialism. But the second most serious problem that he faces when he goes out and speaks is doctrines. The doctrines of fundamental religious people, such as fundamental Christians. It's interesting, I did some research and I came across on the internet, there was this article, Eben Alexander is going to hell. Of course, by a fundamentalist Christian, right? Eben Alexander claims that, all of this new world, blah, 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 but he's not talking about Jesus. He hasn't accepted Jesus as his personal Lord and Savior, da-da-da-da-da-da. Sad, really. These doctrines are blocking and preventing people from really discovering what a world awaits us, what possibilities and potentials we have. So I was very inspired and very impressed. And I went up and I spoke, my wife and I, Sharon, we spoke to him, we took a picture with him. The picture is on her camera, and and also I wanted to give him something. My wife wanted me to give him the autobiography, but I didn't feel the autobiography was the right thing. So I found one of the father's speeches, a couple of father's speeches for the, his peace tours, and when he spoke at the UPF and these things, and I gave it to him, and I said, I'm a pastor of a local church here, and we really thank you for what you're doing, and when you get a chance, I hope you'll have a chance to read this. And I intend to write him a longer letter and talk with him. Then I was reading his book, and he quotes many different people. One of the first people he quoted was Sir John Eccles. And he knows these people, Morton Kaplan, Sir John Eccles. And all of these people are scientists And do you recognize their names for a reason? Because they attended Father's science conferences. Back in the 70s, Father already was bringing these scientists together and trying to encourage them at ICUS, the International Conference for the Unity of the Sciences, to consider absolute values. And Father developed a personal relationship with these people. You know, Ken Mellenby, these different names that I throw out there that we don't know, but Eben Alexander knows these people. He knows their research. He's studying and learning about them. So there's this connection that's being woven. You know, God's homeland is the peace kingdom are built on the foundation of the realm of his liberation. I want to read one of the very last things Father said. This is the 50-year anniversary of HSA in 2004. Father said, "Heavenly fortune is with each of you present here today. Though our time together is short, you can become people of the kingdom of heaven simply by living according to what I have taught you today. That is, first, live in the certainty of God's existence to the point that you can feel his presence against your skin. Second, be certain of the reality of the spirit world and use your life on earth to prepare for your eternal life in the spirit world. Third, live in attendance to your conscience as you would your teacher, your God, and your parents." Everything Eben Alexander is talking about is based on his belief that our conscience, our consciousness, the essence of who we are, is the subject and exists beyond the limits of time and space. And that we are meant to realize that and discover that and be in tune with that. The very last thing in the providential results of the Third World War, it says, long ago God intended to conclude his providence of restoration in Adam's family by working through Cain and Abel. Instead, Cain murdered Abel, commencing the sinful history of humanity. God began the dispensation of dividing good and evil to restore the failure in Adam's family on the individual level and developed it through the levels of family, clan, society, people, and nation. The time has come when God conducts this dispensation on the world level. God intends to restore, through indemnity, the entire providence, which was prolonged to the third stage by winning victory in the 3 world wars, which belong to the final chapter of providential history. The 70s, the 80s, the 90s, it was done. God won the victory. In the beginning, the first human ancestors lost their connection of heart to God when they fell prey to the tempting words of Satan. Through the internal spiritual fall and the external physical fall, they inherited the lineage of Satan. Therefore, the providence of restoration can be completed only after fallen people restore their heart toward God through God's life-giving word, are saved both spiritually and physically, and inherit God's lineage. That is what the mission of the true parents was. And that is what is being carried out today. People like Eben Alexander, they are now being inspired and guided and encouraged by God directly to go out and challenge the old way of thinking, to make the way straight for the truth that will ultimately liberate us. So the divine principle itself explains these things so completely and so clearly. The victories of God's side in the 3 world wars will fully restore through indemnity all these aspects of the providence of restoration. They will make possible the realization of God's ideal world, for which God has labored with unremitting tears over the centuries of human misery since the fall. It is finished. And we are seeing the actual activity of God through people like Eben Alexander. And if people are opening their minds and their hearts. So the way is right for us to share our lives with people. So we have to share our lives with people. And then we can help people with situations like their doctrines. Only the divine principle can really unravel those doctrines. You know, that misunderstanding of who Jesus was, of what it means to be saved, of why he has a special relationship with God. Not because he did supernatural things, not because he was Superman, but because of his lineage. And then true parents gave the blessing. You may ask why a religious figure would fund a conference on science. The reason is because God is the greatest scientist of all. The complicated problems of the world cannot be fully understood within the narrow perspectives of individual fields of knowledge. I recognize that in the Middle Ages, religious dogmatism blocked scientific exploration and limited man's material development. However, it is also a big mistake for humanistic thinkers since the Age of Enlightenment to hold that religious belief is inferior to reason and that man's spiritual needs are in conflict with human reason. Father is saying we have to have both. This is exactly what this man, Eben Alexander, discovered. And this is his crusade. He is very much on a crusade. He is a man with a mission, and he's very enthusiastic. He's very inspired. It's very refreshing. So refreshing to see this happening. You know, the Conference of the Unity of the Sciences. Already, I believe, true parents, they created the foundation for all of these things that are taking place now. They're taking place because God had, you know, Eben Alexander does not have to face Satan in the spiritual world. He doesn't have to. Satan doesn't have power in that spiritual world anymore in the same way that he did. God is the one now. God has been liberated. And so God can exercise his power and his authority. Sometimes, you know, you and I, we wish that God would do, you know, bigger miracles. But the little ways that he communicates with us. Another very interesting thing in his book is he talks about things like finding little dimes and having these little coincidental experiences with people. And he says those are also very important. He said not everybody is going to have a near-death experience. But God, you know, the spiritual world communicates with us in many different ways. And he uses examples of people with butterflies and, you know, things that happen to them coincidentally after someone dies, etc., etc. So I would strongly advise, encourage you to, if you want to be inspired, this book is very inspiring and very educational. And it offers a material. It offers material for us that we can use in our conversations with other people. Because this kind of person is a person who he commands your attention, and he has the ability to communicate, and he needs our support. You know, he's constantly, you know, he's being attacked by people too, and you know, but in any case, he knows. I mean, he knows what he experienced. He knows what's real. And, you know, it's amazing. And in closing, another very interesting thing. I have often thought, what happens to people when they have Alzheimer's disease? You know, when people get so old and they lose their memory. They don't even recognize their loved ones. I thought, wow, this is especially difficult. This is especially cruel. But the interesting thing about him is if you read his experience in Proof of Heaven, he lost his memory completely. Then he went into the spiritual world. So when he describes the spiritual world, the first thing he experienced was darkness. And he explains it was the earthworm's view of the world. He existed for a certain period of time. He doesn't know how long. It seemed like a long time. He was just covered by darkness for a long time. It's almost like he went back to the very beginning of where the Spirit starts to come into existence. And then he saw someone, he saw light, and then he eventually was able to be pulled out of this soil, this earthly place, and he rose up into a higher realm of the spiritual world. And he says it was both frightening, but he wasn't afraid at a certain point. He accepted this situation. He was calm, even though he was almost in a way buried. But he sensed some living presence. Even so, I thought, wow, this is interesting. So if we lose our memory, there's still an essence of ourselves that will survive. And eventually, we'll get our memories back. So I'm thinking about this whole point. In any case, I want to encourage us, really be confident, really be hopeful, really be assured that we are on the right path, that God is working around us right now in remarkable ways to share and to encourage people to realize. And so Eben Alexander, he really believes that he says the 20th century was the age of materialism, but the 21st century, and now the world is going to go through this incredible reawakening, or an awakening to the reality that spirit is real. And this is exactly what True Parents predicted. True Father said, the age of faith and the age of reality, the two would come together. And that's everything that the divine principle is about reason and spirituality, material and spiritual, mind and body unity, the unity between the spiritual world and the physical world, and how they relate and what our position is. Thank you. Let's pray. Heavenly Parent God, thank you. These words, I know you, 40 years ago, you were teaching us and explaining to us and educating all of us through our true Father, through our true parents. You taught us all of these things already about the spiritual world and the physical world, about mind and body unity. You taught us about the fall of man. You taught us about why we were poisoned, why we became so ignorant, how we lost your words of truth. We lost knowledge of you and of the spiritual world. And Satan came to exist, and Satan was an enemy. And Satan constantly and continually, all through history, was undermining and attacking and trying to destroy. Anytime you were trying to enlighten people and educate people and make people aware of the truth, Satan was there to try to convince them that it was a lie, and constantly encouraging and inspiring people to go against your principle, to be filled with anger and resentment and hatred, and to hurt other people, even to find joy in hurting other people. Heavenly Parent, help us to not have this give and take anymore with these darker spiritual forces, but instead we can pull away and we can connect to the principled way of life. Thank you. Through our true parents, we have been liberated. Through our true parents, we have been educated, and we are changed. Our lineage has even changed through the blessing. We are not of the earthly world anymore. We are connected to you absolutely through the blessing, and other people around us can be blessed. Anyone can connect now to you through our true parents, through us, through the principle. Thank you that you've been so patient with us, and help us to recognize you working in our lives every day, and let us find ways to share our lives with you. I pray that your will can be done, and I report these things, and collectively we all in this room want to be grateful to you, grateful to our true parents, grateful that we can have this knowledge. We've had this knowledge for so long. Help us to embody it now and really become confident in our daily lives. And I pray this and report this in our names. And my name, John Pace, with Sharon Pace as Blessed Central Family. Amen and Achu.